Imagine a moment when everything goes silent. No distractions, no noise. Just you and whatever begins to rise within. A strange pressure in your chest. A hollow feeling you can't quite explain. As if something is off, but you don't know what. You try to ignore it, grab your phone, look for anything to distract yourself. But no matter how much you run, the feeling always comes back. Stronger, louder. From a young age, we were taught to believe that suffering is a mistake, something that needs to be fixed, silenced, eliminated. If it hurts, it's wrong. If it feels uncomfortable, it shouldn't be there. And so we spend our entire lives trying to escape something that may have never been the real problem. Robert Adams taught that suffering doesn't appear by accident. It isn't a flaw in life. It is a call. A silent call that emerges when you begin to drift away from who you truly are. But what if this pain isn't the end, but the beginning? What if the problem was never the suffering itself, but your resistance to it? Take a moment and look closely at how you usually respond when discomfort shows up. You don't pause. You don't observe. You react. You reach for something. Your phone. A conversation. A distraction. A plan. Anything that can pull you away from that feeling. Not because you understand it, but because you've been conditioned to escape it. Modern life has perfected this escape. Endless scrolling, constant noise, quick dopamine, shallow answers. There is always something available to keep you from sitting with yourself. And at first, it feels like relief. But beneath that temporary comfort, something unresolved remains. Quiet. Waiting. The truth is, suffering becomes unbearable not because of its intensity, but because of the way you resist it. The moment discomfort appears, the mind labels it. This is wrong. This shouldn't be happening. And from that moment on, a silent war begins. A war between what is and what you think should be. And that war is exhausting. You're not just feeling pain. You're fighting it. You're rejecting it. You're trying to control something that was never meant to be controlled. And the more you try to push it away, the more persistent it becomes. Because resistance doesn't dissolve suffering. It feeds it. Think about it. Haven't you noticed how some feelings grow stronger the more you try to avoid them? Anxiety intensifies when you try to suppress it. Emptiness deepens when you try to fill it with distractions. The very act of running away gives it more power. But here's where it gets even more subtle. What you call your suffering may not even belong to you. It feels personal. It feels intimate. It feels like you are the one hurting. But if you slow down for just a moment, you may begin to notice something strange. The pain appears, but so does the awareness of that pain. There is something in you that can observe it, and that changes everything. Because if you can observe it, then maybe you are not it. Yet most people never reach this realization. They stay trapped in a cycle, feeling, reacting, escaping, repeating. Not because they are weak, but because they were never taught to look deeper. And so suffering is misunderstood. It is treated as an enemy, when in reality, it may be pointing to something much deeper, something that cannot be solved through distraction, control, or escape. The question is, if suffering is not the real problem, then what is it trying to reveal? What if the problem was never the suffering itself, but your resistance to it? Take a moment and observe, with complete honesty, how you usually respond when discomfort appears. You don't pause. You don't sit with it. You don't try to understand it. You react, almost instantly. You reach for something. Your phone, a conversation, a distraction, a plan, a solution. Anything that can pull you away from what you're feeling. Not because you truly understand what's happening inside you, but because you've been conditioned your entire life to escape it as quickly as possible. Modern life has perfected this pattern of escape. Endless scrolling, constant stimulation, instant entertainment, quick dopamine hits that give you just enough relief to keep going, but never enough to resolve what's actually there. There is always something available to prevent you from being alone with yourself. And at first, it feels like relief. It feels like control. It feels like you've managed to silence the discomfort. But beneath that temporary calm, something remains unresolved. Quiet, patient, waiting for the next moment of silence to rise again. The truth is, suffering doesn't become overwhelming because of its intensity alone. It becomes overwhelming because of the way you resist it. The moment discomfort appears, the mind immediately labels it. This is wrong. This shouldn't be happening. I need to fix this. And from that instant, a silent internal conflict begins. A conflict between what is actually happening and what you believe should be happening instead. And that conflict is what drains you. You're not just experiencing pain, you're fighting against it, you're rejecting it, you're trying to control it, reshape it, eliminate it. But the more force you apply, the more persistent it becomes. Because resistance doesn't dissolve suffering, it reinforces it. It gives it structure. It gives it continuity. Think about your own experience. Haven't you noticed how certain feelings seem to grow stronger the more you try to push them away? Anxiety intensifies when you try to suppress it. Sadness deepens when you refuse to face it. Emptiness expands when you try to fill it with distractions that never truly satisfy. The act of running away doesn't weaken the feeling, it strengthens the cycle. But here is where things become even more subtle and more profound. What you call your suffering may not actually belong to you in the way you think it does. It feels deeply personal. It feels intimate. It feels like you are the one who is hurting. But if you slow down, even for a brief moment, and observe carefully, you may begin to notice something unusual. The pain appears, but at the same time, there is an awareness of that pain. There is something within you that can witness it, that can notice it, that can recognize it without becoming it. And this realization changes everything. Because if you can observe the suffering, then there is a part of you that exists beyond it. Yet most people never arrive at this point. They remain trapped in a repetitive loop, feeling, reacting, escaping, and repeating the same patterns over and over again. Not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack strength, but because they were never guided to look deeper than the surface of their own experience. And so suffering continues to be misunderstood. It is treated as an obstacle, as an enemy, as something that must be eliminated at all costs. When in reality, it may be pointing directly to something far more essential, something that cannot be solved through distraction, control, or avoidance. So the real question is no longer how to escape suffering, but what is it trying to reveal? If suffering is not the real problem, then we have to ask a deeper, more uncomfortable question. Who is actually suffering? At first, the answer seems obvious. I am. It feels undeniable. The pain feels personal. It feels like it belongs to you, like it defines your experience, like it is happening to you. But if you slow down, truly slow down, and begin to observe your inner experience with honesty, something unexpected starts to reveal itself. The suffering appears, but it doesn't stay constant. It comes and goes. It changes in intensity. It shifts in form. Sometimes it feels like anxiety. Other times, sadness. Sometimes emptiness. Sometimes fear. But no matter what shape it takes, one thing remains the same. There is always an awareness that notices it. And that awareness is not suffering. This is where everything begins to break apart. Because if suffering were truly you, it would never leave. It would be constant, unchanging, permanent. But that's not what happens. What happens is that thoughts arise, emotions follow, sensations appear in the body, and then, eventually, they fade. Yet something in you remains present through all of it, silently witnessing the entire process. That silent presence is what Robert Adams pointed to again and again. He taught that what you truly are is not the mind, not the thoughts, not the emotional waves that pass through you. What you are is the awareness behind all of it, the observer, the silent witness that has always been there, even before you had words to describe your own existence. But here is where the illusion becomes incredibly convincing. From a very early age, you were taught to identify with your thoughts, to believe them, to build your identity around them. Every memory, every story, every label, this is who I am, this is what I feel, this is what happened to me, was constructed by the mind. And over time, that construction became so solid, so familiar, that you stopped questioning it. You didn't just experience thoughts, you became them. And once that identification is established, suffering becomes inevitable, because the mind is unstable by nature. It constantly moves between past and future. It replays what has already happened. It imagines what could go wrong. It creates narratives, interpretations, expectations. And when those expectations are not met, suffering arises. Not because reality itself is broken, but because the mind resists what is. So the suffering you feel is not coming from life itself. It is coming from the interpretation of life created by the mind. And this is a subtle but radical shift. Because if suffering is created by identification with thought, then freedom is not about fixing the world, changing people, or controlling circumstances. Freedom begins when you stop confusing yourself with the voice in your head. But this is not something the mind easily accepts. The mind wants control. It wants answers. It wants certainty. It wants to maintain the illusion that it is in charge. And the moment you begin to question it,
For most of your life, you believed you were your thoughts. You believed the mind had to be fixed, silenced, controlled. But no one ever told you this. The mind was never the problem. The real trap is believing you are it. There is something in you that watches fear, that watches pain, that watches every thought arise and disappear. That observer has never suffered. It was never born, and it will never die. When this is seen, effort disappears. The spiritual search ends. Because the one who was searching was never real. This is not a teaching to believe in. It is a direct experience. Simple and deeply liberating. The book, The Awakening of the Observer, does not teach techniques. It points to the exact place where the ego dissolves. Each page is a mirror, and what is seen there cannot be unseen. If something in you recognizes these words, the call has already begun. Click the link in the comments and get your copy of The Awakening of the Observer now.
it reacts. It creates more noise, more doubt, more fear. It tells you that you need to figure everything out, that you need to solve your life before you can find peace. But what if that voice is not who you are? What if the one who is aware of that voice is the real you? Pause for a moment and look directly at your own experience. Right now, as you are listening to these words, thoughts may be appearing in your mind. Reactions, agreements, doubts, interpretations. But there is something that is aware of those thoughts, something that is not changing with them. That presence is not anxious. It is not afraid. It is not incomplete. It simply is. And this is why suffering can become a doorway. Because when suffering intensifies, it exposes the instability of the mind. It forces you to see that thoughts are not solid, that emotions are not permanent, that everything you once believed to be you is constantly changing. And in that instability, something deeper becomes visible. Not as an idea, not as a concept, but as a direct experience. The realization that you are not the one who suffers, but the one who is aware of suffering. And that realization changes the entire structure of your life. Because if you are not the suffering, then you don't need to fight it anymore. You don't need to escape it. You don't need to control it. You only need to see it clearly. But very few people are willing to go this far, because this realization comes with a cost. If you are not your thoughts, then who are you? If you are not your story, then what remains? If you are not the identity you've been protecting your entire life, then what is left? And this is where most people stop, not because they can't go further, but because they are afraid to lose what they believe they are. So they return to distraction, to noise, to the familiar patterns of thinking and reacting, not because those patterns bring peace, but because they preserve the illusion of control. But the truth doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. It waits, quietly, patiently, and every time suffering returns, it brings the same invitation, to look again, to question again, to see beyond the surface. And maybe, just maybe, this time, you won't run. Before we move on to the next part, I want to hear from you. You who are watching this right now, on the other side of the screen. I want to know who you are. Drop a comment below with your name and the city you're watching from. If seeing the truth is so liberating, why do you keep avoiding it? Why, even after realizing that suffering may not be what you thought it was, do you still find yourself going back to the same patterns, the same distractions, the same reactions, the same unconscious loops that keep pulling you away from clarity? The answer is not simple, but it is precise. Because awakening threatens everything you believe yourself to be. Most people think they are afraid of suffering, but that's not entirely true. What they are really afraid of is losing the identity they built around that suffering. Because over time, pain doesn't just become something you experience. It becomes something you recognize as you. Your struggles become your story. Your wounds become your personality. Your past becomes your definition. And without even noticing it, you begin to hold on to these patterns. Not because they feel good, but because they feel familiar. And the familiar feels safe, even when it hurts. This is the paradox that very few are willing to face. You don't just suffer. You maintain the structures that keep suffering alive, not consciously, not intentionally, but through subtle, automatic behaviors that reinforce the same identity over and over again. Every time you repeat the same narrative in your mind, every time you relive the same emotional patterns, every time you react in the same conditioned way, you strengthen the illusion of who you think you are. And the ego depends on that repetition to survive. Because without those patterns, without those stories, without those identifications, it begins to dissolve. And the ego does not want to dissolve. It would rather suffer and remain in control than disappear into the unknown. So it creates resistance. It creates doubt. It creates fear. It convinces you that you are not ready, that you need more time, more knowledge, more understanding before you can truly let go. It tells you that something is missing, that something still needs to be fixed, that awakening is somewhere in the future, not here, not now. And while you believe that, you stay exactly where you are. This is why distraction is so powerful. Because it doesn't just entertain you, it protects the illusion. Every notification, every video, every endless scroll is not just a moment of escape. It is a reinforcement of the identity that avoids silence. Because in silence, there is no distraction, no narrative, no reinforcement of who you think you are, only presence. And presence dissolves illusion. That is why so many people feel uncomfortable when everything becomes quiet. Not because something is wrong, but because something false begins to fall apart. And that can feel like losing control. But what you are really losing is not yourself. It is the version of yourself that was built on unconscious patterns. And that is where the deepest fear emerges. If you are not your thoughts, if you are not your past, if you are not your emotional patterns, then who are you? the mind cannot answer that question. And because it cannot answer it, it tries to avoid it. It pulls you back into thinking, into reacting, into identifying. It keeps you busy, occupied, stimulated, anything to prevent you from resting in that unknown space where no identity can survive. But that unknown space is not empty. It is not darkness. It is not confusion. It is clarity without labels. It is existence without effort. It is what remains when everything false is no longer sustained. And yet, to access it, something has to be left behind. Not your life, not your responsibilities, not your ability to function in the world, but the illusion that you are the one controlling everything through thought. And that is what makes this so difficult. Because you are not just letting go of suffering, you are letting go of the one who believes they are suffering. And until you are willing to face that directly, you will continue to run. Not from suffering itself, but from what suffering is trying to reveal. So, if running away only strengthens suffering, what happens when you stop? Not when you fix it. Not when you analyze it. Not when you try to understand it intellectually. But when you simply stop resisting it. At first, this may feel counterintuitive. Everything you've learned tells you to escape discomfort, to solve it, to replace it with something better. But what if, just for a moment, you did the opposite? What if instead of running, you stayed? Not as someone trying to endure pain, but as someone willing to observe it. This is where the shift begins. When suffering arises, don't label it. Don't say this is bad or this shouldn't be happening. Just notice it, feel it directly, without adding a story to it, without turning it into a problem that needs to be solved. Because the moment you stop adding mental resistance, something unexpected happens. The suffering begins to lose its structure, not immediately, not dramatically, but subtly, quietly. What once felt solid starts to move. What once felt overwhelming begins to reveal itself as a series of sensations, thoughts, and reactions, all appearing and disappearing within your awareness. And in that observation, space is created. This is the essence of what Robert Adams pointed to through self-inquiry. Instead of asking, "How do I fix this?" you ask a different question. Who is the one experiencing this? Not as a philosophical idea, but as a direct investigation. Right now, as a feeling arises, look at it. Then look deeper. Who is aware of this feeling? Can that awareness be hurt? Can it be broken? Can it suffer in the same way the mind does? Stay with that question, not to find a quick answer, but to dissolve the false assumption behind it. Because the more you observe, the clearer it becomes. The suffering appears, but the awareness remains untouched. And that realization is not something you create. It is something you uncover. This is why suffering can become a doorway. Not because it feels good, but because it forces you to look beyond the surface. It strips away distraction. It removes the illusion of control. It brings you face to face with what is real. And if you don't run this time, if you stay present, without resistance, without judgment, you may begin to notice that what you were trying to escape was never you to begin with. And in that moment, something shifts. Not outside, but within. If this message touched your heart or helped you in any way, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends and family, because you never know who might need to hear this. And most importantly, don't leave now. There's another video already on your screen, and it was chosen to take you even deeper into this journey. Go watch it, because it may open something inside you that you haven't seen yet. If you truly want to go further, you can also get the book O Despertar do Observador. In it, this subject is explored much more deeply, with practical exercises you can apply in your daily life. The link is in the pinned comment. And if this video made a difference for you, if it really touched something inside, consider supporting the channel with a donation through Buy Me a Coffee. Your support is extremely important and helps us continue creating new content like this. The link is also in the pinned comment. And remember this: don't just watch and move on. Observe, apply, and question. Because real transformation only happens when what you hear becomes part of who you are.